Hi, I'm Angela Fair, and I'm proud to be an artist ambassador for World Watercolor Month. How's World Watercolor Month going for you? Today's prompt is all about simple things, and as a loose painter, simple things are my bread and butter. I want to simplify everything to paint more expressively and more like me. So whether it's a complex subject or just a single object, I'm always looking for ways to get down to the essence and paint it in my style, straight from my heart. And I want to show you today just 4 quick, simple landscapes, because I think landscape painting is a really good way to practice watercolor technique. Painting simple landscapes means you don't have to cloud your brain with all kinds of details. We just make it fast, we make it simple, and we get to play with some color theory, some value studies, and just learn a little bit about how watercolor moves in the process. Let's get started. Before we start painting, I just want to give a shout out to the products that I'm using today. I have my very favorite paintbrush, my number 10 Escoda Versatile Rigger. I have a beautiful half pan of 12 colors from Core, and I have a pad of Hahnemühle Leonardo paper. I had to rack my brain for a second because they make actually several great lines of paper. If you want to learn more about the products I'm using and also have a chance to win them, you're going to want to check out my Watercolor Summer Challenge at watercolorsummerchallenge.com. I have info on these products as well as lessons to help you in your watercolor journey. I'm all about helping artists paint more expressively and paint from the heart. So I've drawn out on my Hahnemühle paper here 4 little landscape sections here, and each one of these is about the size of a 4x6 photograph, so a nice little size. Makes a great postcard or a greeting card if you have a painting that turns out well. Plus they're fast to paint, so you don't have to feel like you're committing your life to painting. And the first thing we're going to do is just a quick value study. Value studies are where we get to explore light and dark patterns in our paintings. And this can be really helpful to a watercolor artist because when we paint, we need to kind of know what values we're going to be using from a fairly early stage. If you're waiting till later in the painting to think about values, you might find out that you've covered up some of your lightest areas with too much paint, and then there's this battle to figure out how to get those light areas back. So in watercolor, where with the white of the paper is the light values of our painting, we need to be able to focus on planning where those light values are going to stay. So a very quick value study can really help with that. Take your reference photo out. You can actually convert it to black and white. We all have access to those kind of photo editing of filters, and using that can really help us to determine where to put those darks and what areas to leave light. And I'm doing a little landscape photo from a hike that I took earlier in the spring, and this particular photo has a lot of elements in it that would be very confusing to paint if I just tried to paint it straight up. So I'm going to do this value study to help me understand it, and then on my Watercolor Summer Challenge site you can actually link up to the full tutorial on how to paint this reference photo. So I'm just looking for my darkest areas right now. Painting a value study generally happens really fast, and all the colors run together. We don't want to wait for areas to dry, so we're going to do it all in one layer. Right now I'm looking for my middle values, so the medium darks, and that Payne's gray goes down pretty dark. So then just with my brush I can soften and blend and spread some of that color out so it doesn't take over the entire painting. And I'm always talking to myself in my head when I'm painting. I want to see, and sometimes that means telling myself, Angela, don't paint over there, leave that space white, and so forth. As an artist, I can also choose to edit. If I don't like that tree that's kind of dead center along the bottom of the painting, of the photo, which I really don't think it's going to help my composition, I can leave it out and just kind of paint, imagine as if it wasn't there. And if you have a good imagination, you're going to be a more creative artist. And if you don't have a good imagination, well, you actually do. If you've ever had a spooky feeling walking into a dark room and wondered what was going to jump out at you out of the darkness, or if you've ever started having fearful imaginings when your spouse was late coming home for dinner and didn't call you, you know you have an imagination. So we're going to put that to work in painting and take that artistic license in order to paint more creatively. So right now I see some areas that are really powerful. I see some strong darks that are popping out in these two areas. And I like that my eye actually follows this curve of this hill from this dark area to this dark area. And that might have been something that I wouldn't have noticed if I hadn't done a value study first. And I resisted, I have to tell you, I resisted doing value studies for so many years before I started realizing how much they would help me in processing the information in my reference photos and being able to paint with more confidence. And then I felt kind of silly because I realized as well that I really had spent, that it really takes very little time to do a value study. And here all the complaining I was doing about not wanting to do value studies was, you know, costing me tons in terms of having to redo paintings because I couldn't figure out where my darks and lights should go. And it would have just only been a few minutes of playing with those dark values and light and figuring out where to put them. That just, it helped me so much. Don't take my word for it. Try it yourself and see if it doesn't make it a little easier for you to understand your painting. And here I'm looking at my reference photo, and in the value study process, I'm also learning how all the different elements fit together. And I really like that I have this light slash of white here that symbolizes my river. And I changed the shape of the river just a little bit because I wanted to have a little more visible toward the center of the painting. And it's got some really dark values around it, and those dark values help pull the eye there just like a target. So I think that's pretty fun. And so that's one way to use these small postcard size paintings. Another way is just to play with simple landscapes in your spare time, in your warm-up time when you start painting. So I might take some of this beautiful phthalo blue and a little bit of the ultramarine as well, because I always find the blues of skies can't be summed up with just one single color. And you're seeing why I like the Escoda Versatile right now, because I love using the side of the brush to fill an area with color fairly quickly. And I just made myself a nice, beautiful sky with some puffy clouds. And those puffy clouds are awfully pretty, but clouds are never just white because they have shadows. And the shadows in a cloud tell us where the light is. So if I have shadows along the top of the cloud, it might mean the light is coming from the bottom. And if the shadows are along the bottom, it might mean the light is coming from the top. Or it's going to mean that, even if you didn't intend it to mean that. And so you'll get these different times of day. And I've just mixed a little of that ultramarine blue with my burnt umber, one of my very favorite grays. And I could do cloud studies all day long. They change all the time, they're beautiful, and they make me a better painter. Trying out ideas and experimenting is a really good way to learn. And if you're always doing the same thing, are you really learning? Now, I grabbed, I think, a bit of phthalo blue when I went into these little half pans, and they're so small that it's really easy with this larger brush to grab a color that's nearby another. So my gray got a little bit greenish because the phthalo blue has a little bit more of a green tone. So I had to add a little bit of red from here to just balance out that green and get my truer gray back. And it's still a little bit greener than I would like, so a little more blue I think will help with that. And I'm exaggerating a little bit here just for the sake of the video, maybe how many darks are in there. Remember as well though that the stronger your sunlight, the darker your shadows are going to be. That's why we always look so terrible in harsh sunlight when people take photos. We have those big dark circles under our eyes. And then with a simple landscape, The bottom, the lower half, is as simple as grabbing some sap green and some of the Nicolazo yellow. I'm so glad they included my favorite yellow in this half pan set. And just sweeping that across. The Aquazol binder in the core watercolor paint gives it a real whoosh, and you can see that bleeding up into my clouds. My clouds are actually down, touching the ground right now. I think I might add a little bit of blue just down below here to give us a feeling of low sky on the horizon. But it's a simple experimental landscape, so we have some freedom to see what works and what doesn't. We got 2 more squares here that we can use to plan our next landscape and maybe improve what we've done in this one. So, yeah. Now, I don't think an experimental landscape would be very experimental if we didn't do the next one a little bit more creatively. So let's grab from the E square of the half pans here. They're all marked with letters, and then we have this little code here where I've painted a little square in each to show me what colors I have. And I'm going to mix a little bit of the quinacridone magenta with this violet that I already have in my palette. And we're going to, let's turn our paper this time and do a vertical orientation. Another big cloud, but I'm doing a purple sky. This time we're going to play with a hard and soft edge, so I'm going to soften with a damp brush so that some of that color can flow into my cloud shape. And if I'm using a brush that's, I call it a neutral brush, it's got the same amount of moisture as is already on my paper. A neutral brush will not interrupt the balance of movement and color on the paper. A little more color on that side. Now our landscape, we were going quite dramatic with our colors of the violet here. I'm going to stay dramatic. We're going to pull out Violet's complement in the Nicolazo yellow and create some beautiful grassy lines. And then straight into the sap green, dropping that in to bleed into the yellow. And then I think we should paint a tree just for fun. So I'm going to grab some of my burnt umber, which is kind of a traditional choice for trees. And then I accidentally grabbed too much phthalo turquoise, phthalo blue. Sorry, try that again. Let's grab some burnt umber, which is a traditional choice for trees. So we don't want to be too traditional. So I'm going to add a little bit of the cobalt blue just to make it a little grayer. And a little bit of dioxazine violet as well. And that's going to be very dark tree trunk. It went on quite a bit darker than I want to paint with for this first tree shape. So now I'm going to use a damp brush to pull that tree trunk up across the top of the page. Now with the core colors, I mentioned how they bleed. They have that whoosh factor that pushes them out across any moisture that's already on the paper. And so we are seeing some of that happen, but it works okay. And we shouldn't be afraid to let things bleed a little bit in our paintings. It doesn't hurt to have some unity where the different elements are connected to each other. I'm using mostly straight dioxazine violet right now. And I like how it creates some shadows in my trees. And then if I wanted to, well, you can see I've already got branches happening because my color is bleeding because of that Aquazol whoosh. So we're going to now grab a little bit of our brown with a nice pointy dagger brush. Love the ability that I have with this brush to create some incredible lines. So we can just pull it across. Things are still moist, so we know we're going to have some bleeding here. And that's okay. We want to have that softness so that we have a scene that, I don't know, I just feel like it looks more interesting with a little bit of softness. It gives us maybe a windswept look, maybe the feeling that everything's moving. And then once this is dry, I could choose to go back in and add just a few darks to that tree to really make it pop. I'm not going to do that for the sake of this quick video, but it is an option. And then let's do one last landscape. I'm thinking maybe a beach scene. So we'll start with our blue sky. We're going to make it nice and blue here. And let's make it fairly smooth. Phthalo blue is a staining color, so when you put it on in a powerful stroke, it might just stay put. I'm going to create a little cliff here, and then the horizon. When you have a staining color and you place it on your place the brush stroke on your paper, if you do not soften and bleed it right away, you very likely will see some staining occur. So that if you were to place multiple brush strokes near each other, you very possibly would see each individual line. So we don't really want that in this case. I'm going to paint my water in this very similar blue, since we're doing a beach scene. Ooh, too bright. Not bright enough. So I quickly paint the shape of my water, and actually I'm going to go right up to the horizon line here. We're going to see a bit of a line where the colors overlap, and then I'm going to move down. And as I move, I want to keep moistening my brush. I don't want to run out of color, but I don't mind if the color changes a bit from back to front. That seems like a true picture of what could be happening in the water. And now I'm not working from a reference photo here, which can seem like a risk. But when you don't use a reference photo, that means you get to exercise your imagination and your memory. And those two things, we should be working to improve our ability to paint what we remember seeing and not just always paint exactly what we see. When we're working from a reference photo, often you'll get wrapped up in the details instead of keeping things simple. And if our goal is simple things, we really don't want to do that. So we're going to just create our little cliff here. I'm using a little bit of the brown oxide with the orange as well, the transparent pyrrole orange. And I'm going to actually pull that color down into the beach as well. And it's going to bleed into my water, which I think is a good thing because water is transparent. I think sometimes we have a tendency to paint water as this big blue flat shape. And the truth of the matter is when we have shallow water, we're going to see through that water to what's underneath. So the color might get a little murkier when it gets close to shore. And we also have reflections on the water. If it's a really sunny day, you're going to see some strong shadows and reflections. And those highlights are going to be really white. And so those are all things to keep in mind. I'm using now the dioxazine purple and a little bit of ultramarine blue to create some shadows here and texture in my cliff. And maybe a little too dotty and spotty, I'm not sure. We'll let it be. I'm not going to panic. This is a tiny little sketch, so it should be relaxed feeling and loose. And I think we're going to see if we can use Payne's Gray, maybe, and paint a few little rock shapes in here. Actually, I'm pulling some of that Payne's Gray up. I like that color a little bit better for my shadows on my cliff than the violet. And this is where I get to try out ideas. So I want to paint, if I want to paint a big serious painting later, a beach scene, I have some body of knowledge and experience to work from. I'm going to actually grab a tiny little Escoda brush. This is just a number 8 synthetic. I'm going to see about adding a few little water lines here. I didn't leave any white space for highlights. Oh, and it's still a little damper than it should be maybe to create little waves. So I'm needing to be patient. Watercolorist's curse. And I'm not going to be patient because this is a fast and simple sketch and study, so I can try out ideas in a hurry and then decide to revisit it when I'm willing to take more time. It's my painting. I get to decide. Okay, so these are just 4 quick sketches, ways to play with watercolor and get to know it. We've worked with value studies, so we have light and dark contrast that we're thinking about, helping us to plan a painting. And we worked with wet on dry, where we were using lots of paint on dry paper to create our cloud shapes. We mixed some neutral or some complementary colors to create neutrals. We got to do a little bit of wet and wet painting over here, and just planning out using unexpected colors, working with color theory a little bit, complementary colors to make our yellow and violet look more vibrant. And all of these little things that we're trying out, brush marks over here, smooth washes over here, they make us better painters when we go to do a big serious painting. And then you get to feel maybe a little more competent to exercise watercolor techniques and make good decisions as you're painting when you've spent a lot of time playing around with simple things. Don't forget to check out watercolorsummerchallenge.com for more information on the products I've used, a chance to win them, and a painting lesson just for you. I'm Angela Fair. Thanks for watching.